Hey, thanks for listening to the Fearfully and Wonderfully Me podcast. Ladies, if you're ready to take your leadership to the next level, I'd love to invite you to join me on a monthly call on personal and professional leadership development, specifically for women. You can join from Zoom via your desktop or on the mobile app on your phone. The app is free. There's no cost to join the sessions, and I invite you to just come along and grow with me and the other ladies who are committed to developing themselves personally and professionally, increasing their influence, developing their leadership, and maximizing their results. Hey, you can find out more details and get the registration link at riastory.com/leadership call. See you then. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode on Be Humble So You Don't Stumble. That's actually one of my favorite quotes from Warden Burl Cain, who was the prison warden for Angola Prison, which really had the reputation when he took over the leadership there. It had the reputation of being the worst prison in the United States, and he really transformed the culture there. But I love what he says: be humble so you don't stumble. Another great quote talking about being humble before stumbling or having humility. Amir Ganad says, having the tenacity to lead and the humility to serve are the key ingredients of transformative leadership. And really, when we're talking about humility, I think we have to talk about it in two different perspectives. Number one, we all know that we should have humility when it comes to learning, when it comes to growing, and realizing that we don't always have the answers, right? So, humility on a personal level, because that comes with maturity and sometimes learning the lessons the hard way. But having humility is the balance between arrogance and confidence, right? When we have humility and confidence, it keeps us from being arrogant or thinking that we know it all or we have all of the answers, because none of us do. Now, I always have to just clarify that. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't have pride in doing a job well, or if you've worked to accomplish something or have, reaching a goal, you should have some satisfaction in having done so, because you've accomplished something and you should have some pride in that. But the difference is having some confidence and pride in what you've accomplished and what you've built. It's not the problem isn't thinking, "Oh, I've done well," but thinking, "What a great person I am to have done it," right? So you see the difference. That's the line between confidence and arrogance. And that's the humility, right? Confidence is knowing you can do something, and arrogance is boasting about it. And maybe all of us can relate to being early in our journey, as a teenager or as a young person in our career, and thinking, "Man, I've accomplished this and I have the answers and no one can tell me anything." I can remember times when I wasn't ready to receive advice because I didn't have enough humility. And fortunately, I've grown beyond that. Remember the words of Simon Sinek. He says, great leaders don't need to act tough. Their confidence and humility serve to underscore their toughness. Now, as leaders, it's important to be humble because we're setting that example for those who follow us, right? It's setting the right example for the right reasons in the right way. So that's humility from the personal perspective, right? Having the humility to recognize we don't always have the answers. We are going to make mistakes, being willing to admit them and take ownership of them and then work to correct them, right? We all make mistakes. If you're not making mistakes, you're not trying anything, you're not doing anything, you're not growing. And no one expects a leader to be perfect and never make a mistake, because leaders get into trouble when they try to cover those up, right? Effective leadership is going to come from not pretending to be perfect, but rather owning those mistakes and working to correct it. So, admitting mistakes and acting to correct them will increase your influence. Trying to cover them up is going to decrease your influence. Now, from the leadership perspective, and kind of back to Amir Ganad's quote about having the humility to serve, right? We want humility as a person to realize that we are growing and learning and we need to, but then also having the humility to be willing to serve others. Because as a leader, that's really that's really what helps us be effective as a leader, is being willing to serve, having the humility to serve. Because leadership is about being that servant leader, right? And not telling everyone what to do, but rather being willing to remove the roadblocks, remove the obstacles, and being willing to serve and being willing to do some of the tough jobs yourself. I can remember I wouldn't have been able to say it like this back many years ago, but I remember working as a office manager in a doctor's office, and unfortunately, one of the patients had a fall just in the parking lot, but he didn't want to tell anyone about it, and so he just kind of came in the office and went into the restroom that we had there in the waiting room. But he was on a blood thinner, and so he was just really because he scraped up, he bumped his elbow and got several scrapes and he wasn't thinking clearly as a result of the fall, and anyway, he just kinda went into the restroom to try to clean up by himself, but it ended up, he had blood on his hands, and so everything he touched and on the wall, and when he would lean up against the wall, it was just, unfortunately, because he was on a blood thinner, blood was getting everywhere in the restroom. Well, someone, another patient went in and saw that and came out and just reported it to us. And so somebody comes to me and they said, "Hey, we've got to do some major cleanup here in the restroom." And even though I couldn't have articulated back then that leadership is partly having the humility to serve, but to me, what that looked like in that moment was rather than telling someone else to go clean that up, because that's a messy job and there's some biohazard concerns there. And so, you have to put on the gloves and you have to get the Sidex, the things that will make sure that we're not exposing anyone to biohazards and bodily fluids and that kind of thing. And so, that's going to be a big job and certainly not one of the more pleasant things. But rather than just, as the office manager, I could have gotten someone else to do it. I could have told someone else to do it. But rather than do that, I had someone else, cover the front desk and the phones and where I was working. And I put on the gloves and I went to the back and cleaned up the restroom. And there again, I wouldn't have been able to tell you that why I was doing that was because I wanted to set the example and be a good servant leader. And I wouldn't have been able to tell you that this was a good leadership principle that would help me increase my influence with my team. All I knew was I didn't want to be the kind of leader that would make someone else do a job that I was not willing to do myself, right? I knew without even being able to articulate it, I knew I wanted to be able to say, I've never asked someone to do something I wasn't willing to do, right? I don't have any problem going first and setting the example and saying, you know what, when it comes down to a dirty, tough job, I will get right in there with you before I'll tell you to do it. Because to me, that was just a principle of not asking or telling someone else to do something I wasn't willing to do. So, balancing that humility as a leader and sometimes, as a leader, we can't do everything all of the time. We can't always be on the front lines cleaning up the messes or doing the work, and that's okay. We don't have to do that all of the time, but being willing to step in some of the time so that everyone knows we're not leading from behind, right? We're not telling people what to do and directing them to do things we feel we're too good to do, right? Servant leaders, truly effective leaders, realize they're not better than anyone else. They just are in a leadership position. And sometimes that means being willing to get down into the trenches and do the work. Now, not all of the time, because leaders are responsible for the leadership. And so they can't always be doing the hands-on physical work, because if they're doing that all of the time, then they won't have time to actually do the things that only they can do. But it always increases your influence as a leader when you're willing to work beside your team and do some of the stuff that is maybe not fun or not pleasant, right? Doing some of the hands-on work that is going to require you to get dirty, is going to require you to get sweaty, right? That's actually going to increase your influence as a leader when you show people you have the humility to be real and to serve in that capacity. So a couple of things that we can work on to balance that and to develop that humility. Number one, recognizing limitations. Make sure that you always guard against having pride by remembering that you have weaknesses. Recognize what you can do, what you cannot do, what you should not do, what you do well, and what you don't do. No one's great at everything. So if something's not in your strength zone, be willing to step back and ask for help rather than cause an issue because you're too proud. Number two, give credit. Great leaders know they cannot accomplish much without the help of their team, and it's perfectly acceptable to say thank you when accepting a compliment, but don't hesitate to shine the spotlight on those who make it happen. So be willing to give credit. And then number three, become less self centered. When it comes to humility, I love Rick Warren's quote, he states, True humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. Humility is thinking more of others. Humble people are so focused on serving that they don't think of themselves, right? And there again, it's okay to have the confidence and the pride in accomplishing something. It's not that you want to put yourself down or think less of yourself, but just think of yourself less often, right? Thinking more about others. And last but not least, number four, becoming more value centered. The first steps in overcoming too much pride are to acknowledge it and realize it, and then work to embrace that value of humility in your life. And if you need help with this, it's okay to ask someone else, right? Find a mentor who's got a foundation of humility. And it's being willing to take feedback and to learn and grow in that way. And sometimes we do need help with that, right? Sometimes we need that trusted mentor who can pour into us and help us see the blind spots. If this is an area of growth for you, it's recognizing when in your circumstances have you acted out of confidence and when have you acted out of arrogance, and making sure that you are recognizing that and aware of that, because that's the first step. And then working to overcome that, to correct that, working from a place of, hey, I'm not perfect. I am making mistakes, but I'm working to overcome them. And that is always going to increase your influence exponentially. Until next time.
Start increasing your influence and maximizing your potential with Ria's audiobooks. Available at audible.com, amazon.com, and iBooks. Please visit riastory.com to learn about Ria's books, resources, speaking, and training programs. Thanks for listening.